morning, everybody. Welcome. It's so good to see all of you. Tanya is out of town this week at a conference, and my name is Jennifer Webster, and she had asked me last time to fill in for her when she was gone, and I had agreed, and then as some of you know, I totally freaked out about it and said I'm a therapist, not a speaker, so we did things differently, and we did the Bible study like a therapy session, and so we're doing that again this time. I am a licensed professional counselor here at church. We've been here for 22 years. Last time my husband graciously came and was Jacob, and this year he is going to be King David, since y'all have been studying all about David. So without any further ado, we're going to get started. So, thank you. Hi, I'm Jennifer Webster.
I'm King David.
It's very nice to meet you. I have to say, have a seat, please.
Thank you.
As a therapist, I have never counseled a king before. We don't have kings here, but we are enamored with all things royal. So
I've heard about the spare. Is that what it's called?
Yes, that's quite controversial.
That's not me. Matter of fact, I'm the youngest of 7 brothers, so I'm not the spare. I wasn't the spare, and we weren't royalty. We were shepherds.
Wow. So you're the youngest of all your brothers, and you didn't have a lineage of being king. How did you become king then?
Well, in a weird way. So we had this guy who was a judge named Samuel that kind of did what God told him to do, and he showed up one day, and he told my dad, line your sons up. And I didn't even get invited to the meeting.
Because you were the youngest.
So Samuel goes and he looks at all my brothers and says, it's none of these. And he said that God told him not to look at what people look at, which is the outer appearance, but to look at the heart, which is what God looks at. And I guess I had a heart that God could use because Samuel anointed me as the king.
Wow. You know, that's funny because God goes on to call you a man after his own heart. And I use your story a lot in therapy because that's kind of confusing and very encouraging, especially in light of everything you did.
Well, I mean, it's confusing to me too, which is part of why I'm here. I mean, I've suffered from a lot of depression and anxiety in all of this, and a friend of mine, Nathan, told me I ought to come talk to you.
Nathan sounds like a very good friend. I'm glad you came in.
Well, he's also a prophet, so he knows me pretty well. Matter of fact, he's the only one that was willing to tell me the hard truth after what I had done. So, you know, he said, come sit down and have a conversation with you. So that's my hope.
Yeah, I'm glad you have. I am familiar with your story, for sure. But you might be happy to know that there's a lot of therapeutic value in just telling your story. Your story matters. And a lot of times when we have difficult things to talk about, we don't want to talk about it and we stuff it down. So I'm really glad you came in. Your story does matter. Why don't you tell me what happened?
Well, let me give you a little bit of background first.
Okay.
Right? So, I mean, you have to remember when Samuel anointed me.
Remind me who Samuel is.
He's the judge that anointed me king.
Okay.
When Samuel anointed me, I was just a teenager. I mean, do you know what I did after that ceremony?
Went and sat on your throne?
Yeah, no. I went back to the sheep. I mean, everybody thinks I just woke up one day and I was the king. But, you know, this was confusing. And yeah, I mean, ultimately, you know, I killed Goliath. I got to play my instruments for King Saul. I became a mighty warrior. But this path has had a ton of twists and turns and ups and downs to get me to where I am right now. And I've experienced a lot of depression and a lot of anxiety going through it.
I looked over your intake form, and you said that you felt like you checked off you'd experienced a lot of trauma. We usually consider trauma to have two defining things. It's a feeling of extreme helplessness and fear. So you don't feel like you have any control over what's happening and that it's very fearful. Does that resonate with what you were going through?
Yeah. Look, I didn't understand what Samuel had done, but I was pretty happy with my life. I mean, I was in the palace. I was getting to play my music. Saul gave me his daughter to be my wife. His son was my best friend.
Wow, y'all are pretty tight-knit.
Yeah, I mean, and then one day, he just snaps. I'm playing my music for him, and he reaches over and he picks up a spear and he just chucks it at me. I mean, he tries to pin me to a wall. And from that point, his anger and his jealousy just grew and grew until eventually I was on the run. I was running from my father-in-law as his whole army hunted me for years trying to kill me.
That is the very definition of trauma.
You think?
We know a lot about the brain now, and what we know is that your brain has a safety center. Its whole purpose is to keep you safe and to keep you alive, and when it feels threatened, it goes into one of these modes of fight, which is kind of what you've done as a warrior, flight, fleeing, which you did, it sounds like, when you had Saul's men chasing you, or freeze, where you just kind of hunker down and try to deal with it. Now we've added some others where you can either appease people or fawn all over people when you have experienced a great deal of trauma. But what we know about trauma is all those physical symptoms of being fearful stay in your body and are stored. And what you want through therapy is to process that trauma. So I'm sorry, you've had quite a bit.
Yeah. What you're saying is what I've gone through.
Okay. Well, before I hear your story, then, can I give you my philosophy on counseling, and you can see if it's a match for you?
Sure, proceed.
Okay, thank you. So I think in our lives, we get two types of wounds. You get physical wounds to your body. You've probably had some of those in your battles. And we get emotional wounds to our hearts. The big difference is that our emotional wounds are completely invisible and no one can see them. And we start getting them at the age we realize we are a separate person from our parents. So around 2 years old, it's why you see a child, completely melt down when a toy is taken away. So there are a couple different kinds of heart wounds. There's real ones, which is abandonment, criticism, neglect, envy.
Father-in-law trying to kill you.
Father-in-law trying to kill you is definitely a heart wound. There's perceived ones like children have, where they feel like their world has just been destroyed, but it's just someone doing something for their safety. And then the third one is there's self-inflicted wounds, which are the wounds we do to ourselves, usually as a result of other heart wounds that we've experienced. So here's how a heart wound becomes back like a physical wound, even though they're invisible. If you have a physical wound and you don't clean it out and take care of it, it has the potential to get infected, get in your bloodstream, and kill you. Our heart wounds do the same thing, because if we don't get them cleaned out, they always lead to anxiety, depression, rage, bitterness, resentment, suicidal thoughts, suicide on an installment plan where you just drink or drug yourself to death. And so my belief is God's desire for therapy is to identify those wounds and get them healed. Now here's the thing though, this side of heaven you can't rewind time and make the wounds go away. You've had some really tragic, horrible things happen and you've been part of it. You can't make that go away, but you can make the wound more resilient and less sensitive to the touch. So I'm guessing, I know you fought at one time a bear, I hear.
And a lion.
And a lion, a bear and a lion, okay. And I know that you won, because you're still here. But I'm assuming that they damaged you, clawed you, scratched you.
I've got some scars.
You've got some scars, but I bet they're not still super sensitive.
I hardly know they're there.
Yeah, so that's what we want. That's what we want in therapy. is for the things that have happened to you and the things that you've inflicted on yourself and on others to start to heal so that they aren't quite so tender and we don't react in such strong ways. So, all that being said, why don't you tell me your story? Tell me what happened with Bathsheba.
I'm just ashamed. I mean, we had just beaten the Syrians. Israel was at peace. I should have been on this high. And instead, I was just sad and I was depressed. And the time came when the kings go off to war, and I didn't go. I sent Joab and I sent the armies out, and I stayed home. I stayed at the palace. And I did a whole lot of nothing. I was laying around on the couch, and one of the days I was on the couch, and I got up, and I walked out on the roof, and I looked, and there was a woman bathing on her roof. And I called one of the servants over, and I said, "Well, who is that?" And he said, "Well, that's Bathsheba, the wife of Uriah the Hittite." I mean,
You knew she was married.
right then I should have just turned around and gone back inside.
Yeah.
But I think my entitlement, my depression, my sadness, I don't know. I said, "Bring her to me." And they did. And she came. And I mean, when I think about it in hindsight, and I think about the power differential between me and her, she didn't have a choice. And I took her. And I didn't even think anything about it. And then a little while later, she sends a message and says, "I'm pregnant." And, you know, I mean, at that point, I could have chosen to do what was right. And instead, I decided to double down. I sent a message to the front lines, and I said, "Send Uriah back." And I thought, well, he'll come home, he'll sleep with her, he'll think it's his, no one will be the wiser. And instead, that guy showed more integrity than I could have ever even imagined or wished for. I mean, he not only did he not go home, he stayed on the steps of the palace and said he couldn't leave. How could he enjoy his life when all of his soldiers' friends were out fighting? So I wrote a note, and I said, "Take this back," and it told Joab to put him on the front lines. Put him out in the front and have him killed. I mean, I have so much guilt and so much shame about what I did. And I've begged God for mercy. And I know in my head that He will forgive me. I just don't know if I can forgive myself. And I mean, I just fight all of this anxiety about what is going to happen now because of what I've done, and this depression over what I've done. It's what I've done.
Yeah. That's a lot. And I can see how that would lead to a lot of anxiety and depression. And you certainly are exemplifying the symptoms that come with that, the fatigue and the crying. But let me tell you a little bit about anxiety and depression and kind of where God fits in with that. I'm going to draw you a picture, if that's okay. This is you. I'm going to give you a crown since you're a king. This arrow to the left represents your past. This arrow to the right represents your future. Depression is about the things that have happened in your past, all the wounds that we've talked about. Anxiety is about your future. These two get married all the time because if you have horrible things that happened in your past, you sure don't want to have it show up in your future, and you don't want to get triggered by it. But what both depression and anxiety do is rob us of living in the present, which is where God wants us to live. So one of the things that throughout your life that I've seen, and that I know that you probably know, is God has uniquely equipped you for every season. And he hasn't left you, and he's given you the right tools and the right weapons. And it's been his game plan and his timing. And he's not done. Surely you can see that looking back on your life.
I mean, I'm trying to. I mean, I know he's my rock. I know he's my salvation. I know he's a mighty fortress in times of trouble. But my soul is just so downcast. I mean, I am so tired of moaning all night long, and I flood my bed with tears.
So this might surprise you, but one of the things that we recommend in counseling that's really helpful for anxiety and depression is something that you're already excellent at doing.
What?
Journaling. Crying out to God, letting God know what all your feelings are, getting them from your brain to your hand, to the paper, back to your eyeball, back to your brain, is very therapeutic, getting in touch with how you're really feeling, putting it on paper so that you can see where God works. In fact, it would thrill me if I could have King David ring King David's words, and I think it's your journal entry number 32. That one's always been very meaningful in counseling.
I did.
Would you
I
be
brought
willing?
my journal.
Good. Would you be willing to read that?
Sure, I can do that. So 32?
32, yeah.
32 says, "Blessed is the one whose transgressions are forgiven, whose sins are covered. Blessed is the one whose sin the Lord does not count against them, and whose spirit is no deceit, and in whose spirit is no deceit. When I kept silent, my bones wasted away. Through my groaning all day long, for day and night your hand was heavy on me. My strength was sapped as in the heat of summer. Then I acknowledged my sin to you and did not cover up my iniquity. I said, I will confess my transgressions to the Lord, and you forgave the guilt of my sin. Therefore let the faithful pray to you while you may be found. Surely the rising of the mighty waters will not reach them. You are my hiding place. You will protect me from trouble and surround me with songs of deliverance. I will instruct you and teach you in the way you should go. I will counsel you with my loving eye on you. Do not be like the horse or the mule, which have no understanding, but must be controlled by bit and bridle, or they will not come to you. Many are the woes of the wicked, but the Lord's unfailing love surrounds the one who trusts in him. Rejoice in the Lord and be glad, you righteous. Sing, all you who are upright in heart."
There, do you see it? Your journal entry has everything that God loves. You praise him, you worship him, you beg for forgiveness, and he forgives. And he doesn't forgive based on whether what your sin was or your obedience. It's his loving kindness alone. And so what we want to work on in therapy is you moving into that absolute truth. And I know that you and Bathsheba suffered tremendous earthly consequences for your sin, and our God does love us enough to have us have consequences for our sin. But overwhelmingly, he still delights in you, and he still loves you. And to quote you, back to you, I think it's, what is that, where you say, as far as the east is from the west, so far has he removed our transgression from us. That's one of your journal entries about God.
I mean, I know that. I do, but I'm just still so sad.
It's sad. And that's one of the things we don't want to discount or minimize, the emotions and the feelings and what happened. It's tragic. It's sad. It was wrong. There's no getting around that. But at the end of the day, what I want to get back to, not to fangirl, but this is one of my favorite journal entries you wrote. This is the day that the Lord has made. In the present, I will rejoice and be glad in it. He's given you another day.
That's 118. I like that one too.
What number?
118.
118. Well, you'd be surprised. It's on coffee mugs and calendars and T-shirts now. So it really played well. So I appreciate you coming and talking about this. I think a lot of people think that people that are famous or kings or royalty or wealthy don't suffer from anxiety and depression. But in our country, it's the most common health issues that we're facing right now. So I appreciate you coming in. I hope it helped to tell your story.
It does. I mean, it helps. It helps for me to hear it out loud. It helps for me to speak it to you. But I need more. I mean, you got to give me some more to get out of this and to stay out of it.
Yeah. So remember when you were a shepherd and you spent all day outside?
Yeah.
Do you have fond memories of that?
Yeah.
That was actually really good for you. Get back outside. Get out of the palace. It's much more easy to be present when we're outside. Take walks. Activate your 5 senses. See what you see and hear and taste and feel and smell. Get back outside. That's a really great thing that you can be doing.
I can do that. I haven't gotten the sling out in a while. I could go
And
do some slinging.
it's been reported you're an excellent shot. So yeah, get back out there. Here's another thing. I've got a few more tips for you. This one might get on your nerves a little bit as a king, and I hope I don't overstep, but you got to watch your diet. You got to watch what you're eating. You got to watch not too much sugar, not too much fats, and here's one. You got to cut down. You got to eliminate the alcohol when you're going through depression and anxiety.
That takes the edge off. I mean, I use that.
It actually takes the edge off for 20 minutes, and then you feel worse than before. And it's also an addictive substance. So I'd really like it if during these bouts of depression and anxiety, you eliminate your alcohol intake. Lastly, when you get anxious or depressed, what all of us tend to do is isolate. We just want to be by ourselves, which is how you found yourself alone in the palace. I want to urge you not to do that. Have some friends that you're accountable with. Set up lunch dates. Take Nathan out to lunch. But whatever you do, interact. God is a God of connection. We're supposed to connect with him, and we're supposed to connect with other people. We need people involved in our lives, and we need to be involved in their lives. And that will keep you off the roof.
I can do that.
So I want to end with one little piece of encouragement for you. As a counselor, I only get to see a snapshot of your life or people's lives. But in your instance, I have this rare knowledge of what all happens for you. And I just wanted to encourage you that I know you're in a really, really dark time right now. And it feels bleak, and it feels like God's far from you. But he's not. And he uses all of these things. In fact, this might surprise you, but your journal entries go on for generations. Your journal entry number 23 gets memorized by people. It gets played at funerals. It gets played for people who are anxious. The grieving, they say those words over the grave. And the joyful, when you're feeling happy, they speak of the heavens declaring the works of God, which I think is your journal entry 19. And then this is really out there, but eventually our Savior on the cross remembers your words. And I know you don't really know that, but the fearful find courage, and like journal entry number 27 is really encouraging to them. So I just want to let you know that God's still at work even when you don't feel it. And he promises that he uses all of that pain, all of those things that you've shared with us today for your good and his glory. And in your case, it goes on for generations. So I really appreciate you coming in. I hope I get to see you some more.
Thank you for that. It was helpful.
Okay, good. Nice to meet you. Thank y'all. Okay, it's a little heavier topic. I think you all have questions at your table, and looks like delicious food at your table. So y'all enjoy, and good to see y'all. Thank you. Thank you.